to describe the hamstring group of muscles with their attachments, nerve supply and actions. Hamstrings is a common term applied to the group of muscles on the back of thigh. Along with the muscles, we are going to see the important nerves and vessels on the back of the thigh. So the main objective of this lecture is the description of the posterior compartment of thigh, that is the back of thigh. This is the posterior compartment of thigh. This is the back of thigh. This is the cross section of thigh. This is the cross section of thigh showing the three compartments: the anterior compartment of muscles, the medial compartment and the posterior compartment. Posterior compartment lies between the lateral and the posterior intermuscular septae. The posterior intermuscular septa is ill-defined because this muscle, the adductor magnus, has parts which is present both in the medial compartment as well as in the posterior compartment. In the anatomical position, these muscles or the posterior group of thigh muscles. So, this is anterior and this is posterior. While dissecting, when the cadaver is in the prone position like this, we proceed in this direction. After reflecting the skin, we see these muscles, the posterior group of muscles, and their positions are explained in relation to each other. This is a dissected image of the back of the thigh showing the muscles of the back of the thigh. This is the lateral aspect. This is the picture of the right thigh, the posterior aspect of the right thigh. This is the lateral aspect. This is the medial aspect. On the lateral aspect, there is a long muscle which is running. This muscle, the long head of biceps femoris. Underneath that is a short belly which is called as the short head of biceps femoris. They both together form a common tendon. On the medial aspect, there is a muscle which has a tendon in its lower part. So, half of the muscle is tendinous. So, this is called as semitendinosus. Beneath that is a muscle which has membranous part in the upper part. So, after reflecting the semitendinosus, we can see the semimembranosus. So, the upper part of semimembranosus is membranous. So, this muscle which is half membranous is called as semimembranosus. Underneath that is a part of adductor magnus. So, this is the image which we see while dissecting. So, superficially is a semitendinosus, underneath that is semimembranosus, and underneath that is adductor magnus. In other words, we can say semitendinosus lies over semimembranosus, semimembranosus lies over adductor magnus. But while describing in the anatomical position, we say semimembranosus is posterior to adductor magnus and semitendinosus is posterior to semimembranosus. So, what we see is a single image, but how we explain differs, whether we are explaining in anatomical position or while dissecting. So, this is the image of dissected right posterior compartment of thigh. So, these are the important muscles of the posterior compartment of thigh: semitendinosus, semimembranosus, long head of biceps femoris, short head of biceps femoris, and ischial head of adductor magnus. Among these muscles, these three muscles are called as hamstrings. So, though we say hamstrings are the muscles of the posterior compartment of thigh, among the muscles of the posterior compartment, only semitendinosus, semimembranosus and long head of biceps femoris are called as hamstrings. Why? Why we are calling it as hamstrings? Ham, the thigh part of the meat, is hanged in the butcher shop by means of the tendons of these muscles. So, these muscles are called as hamstrings. So, these are the tendons of the muscles of the posterior compartment by which the thigh part of the meat is hung from in the butcher shop. So, these muscles are called as hamstrings. Anatomically also we can describe this. So, the femur has a convexity on the anterior aspect like a bow. The hamstring muscles extend from the ischium to the long bones of the leg like a strings of an bow. So the femur is like a bow. These are the strings. So these are called as hamstrings. And these muscles, they cross the two joints, hip joint and the knee joint, but they have no attachment to the femur. They cover the femur without any attachment to the femur. By these definitions, we can say the muscle which is getting attached to the femur or which is not crossing the hip joint or the knee joint is not classified as hamstring muscles. So, under these, there are certain common features for hamstring muscles. The hamstring muscle originates from ischial tuberosity and it is inserted to either one of the long bones of the leg. And they cross the hip joint as well as the knee joint. So, they are flexors of the knee and the extensors of the hip joint. And all these hamstring muscles are supplied by the tibial part of sciatic nerve. So, these are the common features for hamstring muscles. So, we now see the attachments of the hamstring muscles. The hamstring muscles, as we have already seen, originate from the ischial tuberosity and they are inserted to one of the long bones of the leg, except the short head of the biceps femoris. So, biceps femoris is not called as a hamstring muscle, but it is a muscle of the posterior compartment of the thigh, which is not originating from the ischial tuberosity. It is originating from the linea aspera of the femur. That's why it is not included under hamstrings group.